One of us is trash, and the other is a two-bit loudmouth. And this is Trash Radio.
So, for all the reference of El Santo y el Blue Demon, who is Santo? Mexican wrestling star, crime fighter, superhero, inventor, philosopher, gourmand, scientist, secret agent, psychologist, socialite, lover, father. You know, it might be easier to say who Santo isn't than to list his many qualities. You see, every nation has some one implausible cultural icon that speaks a profound truth about its society. These United States have Ronald Reagan. Saudi Arabia has Osama bin Laden. Italy has the Pope. Great Britain has James Bond, or perhaps more appropriately, the prisoner. Japan has Godzilla. But Mexico has El Santo, so Mexico kicks all their asses. Except maybe Japan's. The man who would be El Santo was born in 1917, Rodolfo Guzman Huerta. After a short career under his own name and a previous masked alias, Huerta irrevocably transformed into Santo in 1942, winning an 8-man battle royale in his debut match, clad only simply in an adorned mask. So, after his debut, Rodolfo Huerta vanished from public life. From that day forward, there was only Santo. Huerta went to great lengths to keep his identity secret and his face hidden. He appeared in public as Santo frequently, but never without his mask. After several years of struggling to establish himself as the breakout star of Lucha Libre, Santo entered the 1950s at the height of his popularity. And around this time, someone came up with the notion of creating a Santo comic book. And I'll spare you the breathless exposition, but you should take a look just at the covers, all right, man? Like, just type in El Santo comic and return to pulp. Holy shit. You're gonna see covers of this guy fighting radioactive beasts, solving crime, having to bust himself out of, like, death-defying situations. Like Proto-Taken, but a man in a fucking luchador mask, pretty much. In the comics, he fought crime and things no writer's room could ever come up with today. You know, like even like psychic midgets that have him tied down with rope like he's a fucking giant in Gulliver's Travel. And that's just Act 1, hilarity ensues. So in 1958, these tales crossed over into the movies, and the result was stunning. In the beginning, there was a series of films which, you know, really have to be seen to be believed. And then a second fucking time hilarity ensues. Santo's 54 films include Santo versus the Diabolical Brain, Santo versus the Martian Invasion, Santo versus the Hotel of Death, Santo versus Blue Demon in Atlantis. And the character of Santo was an unreal paragon of intellectual and physical excellence. If you think Batman strains credibility, you haven't seen Santo. In addition to his rigorous and demanding wrestling schedule, which was almost always a key element in his films, Santo filled his spare times with various pastimes like inventing high-tech gadgets. Frequently, a Dick Tracy-style radio home and beacon watch played a role in these films, among other ones. Playing chess, solving crimes, uncovering mysteries of nature, and wooing the ladies. Sometimes accompanied by his masked friend and occasional tag team partner, El Blue Demon. And, you know, that's where yours truly gets his mask from. The films veered from pulpy crime stories to outright fantasy. In Santo on the Diabolical Axe, he faces an Inquisition-era axe-wielding maniac. In Santo versus the Witches, an evil coven of beauties pit their human-sacrificing goons against the resourceful wrestler. In Santo versus Dracula, well, you probably got the idea by now. Santo versus the Martian Invasion features many of the best elements of the Santo series, including voluptuous aliens, bizarre costumes, bad science, and even a Martian dance number. Taking a page from the Ed Wood playbook, The Martians have come to Earth in order to keep the primitive humans in their place. Perhaps needless to say, the fate of the Earth is decided by a wrestling match between Santo and the leader of the Martians. Despite this busy schedule, however, wrestling always came first. In Santo and Blue Demon vs. Frankenstein, Santo's girlfriend is kidnapped by the titular doctor, who has been on a killing spree in which he removes the brains from lovely ladies and transforms them into zombies. Despite the imminent danger, Santo and Blue Demon pause their search so they can go wrestle a best-3 falls match tag team ordeal. And as Santo observes with frustration, he says, quote, "We don't want to wrestle, but we have no choice," end quote. And when the ultimate confrontation between Dr. Frankenstein's monster and Santo finally take place, you guessed it, they had a wrestling match, which, ends in a no contest when the monster takes to the higher ground. But all good things must come to an end. But no one includes Santo on that little fact. Although we live in a world where Major League Baseball players are washed up at 40 and NFL recruits are over the hill at 28, God damn it. Wrestlers almost work well into the middle age. I mean, in part because the pay is so crappy compared to what you make playing for the government-subsidized franchise. Hey, if you just heard that, and the slight shaking of the phone, you go and tell. Right now, his @ on Twitter is Daftwerk, DAFTWERK, and you go pleasantly harass him. You could find him on Instagram as Kos Space Wave. He's my homie. He's a good dude. Hit him up. That's just rather serendipitous. Even for a sport that reveals its elders, Santo was a record breaker. After the movies finally dried up towards the end of the 1970s, Santo continued to perform in the ring. At 64 years of age, he suffered a heart attack in the ring and grudgingly conceded he had to slow down. And after having heart surgery, he returned to the ring one last time for a retirement tour in 1982. This is a wrong number. Oh, I gotta screenshot this for you. What in the fuck is this? Hang on. Good evening, Solomon. This is Jen. Oh, god damn it. No, it's still Daftwerk. This fucking guy. All right. So, pleasantly give him a hard time for me, will you? Ask him when he's gonna fight Bald Bull. So, his son took up the mask to establish his own legacy as El Hijo de Santo, the son of Santo. And, he was one of the top lucha stars in Mexican wrestling leagues and generally considered to be a better wrestler than his father, but definitely a lesser star. To a certain extent, his stardom issue was simply a product of the times. By the end of the 1970s, the populist genre of the no-budget, no-story movie was becoming a thing of the past. So Santo contented himself with public appearances until 1984, when he stunned Mexico by unmasking during a national TV talk show. 2 weeks later, Rodolfo Guzman died of a heart attack. More than 10,000 mourners turned out to view his body. Huerta was buried wearing Santo's silver mask. El Santo, September 23rd, 1917 to February 5th, 1984. So the Blue Demon mask is what I rock. The Santo mask does speak to me, but that's like all white. That stands out even fucking more than an all blue mask. There's like silver with the blue, but obviously the Santo mask isn't all white. There is white and silver to it. But the point is, not to say that it comes with a certain responsibility, but even on a base level, it would be some fucked up appropriation. I'm sounding like old man Haynes right now. It is fucking no crease slacks screaming at phantom children to stay off of his non-existent lawn. And he fucking muttering about arcade games and payphones and quarters, and razzles, and the Mortal Kombat movie. I'm fucking dementia-ridden and in a retirement home to some robot. But anyways, it is pretty wild to see people color outside the lines. Not to say that there's appropriation on like a fucking cultural level, but like on a subcultural level. I remember when Trump was just, elected into office and going to the San Gennaro feast and seeing like hoodlums and dazzling young urbanites wearing like Master of Puppets shirts, and one kid even was wearing a fucking black metal shirt by Venom. And I imagine like 9 out of 10 kids who wear such a thing is because it looks cool, I imagine. And they're not wrong. It's dope as fuck. But it's wild to see like, a girl in a gym wearing a Nails hoodie of the You Will Never Be One of Us album. Like, not even having any idea. Whatever. You know what I'm talking about. It is pretty wild to see people color outside the lines. Not to say that there's appropriation on like a fucking cultural level, but like on a subcultural level. I remember when Trump was just, elected into office and going to the San Gennaro feast and seeing like hoodlums and dazzling young urbanites wearing like Master of Puppets shirts, and one kid even was wearing a fucking black metal shirt by Venom. And I imagine like 9 out of 10 kids who wear such a thing is because it looks cool, I imagine. And they're not wrong. It's dope as fuck. But it's wild to see like, a girl in a gym wearing a Nails hoodie of the You Will Never Be One of Us album. Like, not even having any idea. Whatever. You know what I'm talking about.
I'll get you, bitch.
Okay, so before I discuss El Santo, the first luchador, let me tell you a little bit about my mask. And yeah, I know that's kind of a misnomer. El Santo wasn't the very first luchador, but I'd say like along the lines of, how technically Street Fighter 2 is the first fighting game. Like, it's obviously not the literal first, but the cloth of which all fighting games are cut from. If that's too old-timey of a reference for you Vidya jerks, Street Fighter 3. There you go. Specifically Third Strike. That's the cloth. All modern fighting games or the pinnacle. Look, the point is, like, take first-person shooters, all right? Doom is obviously not the first-person shooter, but it set precedent, and it was the workbench all other first-person shooters were built on. And then from there we get Half-Life, which sort of, like unfolded everything from that point forward following its lead. All right, so are you with me? Good. So that being said, El Santo, for lack of a better, more coherent and neat explanation, we could call him the first luchador. So, back in 2014, I met an ex of mine on the social board on everyone's favorite swirling, gaping asshole of the internet that has now been compromised since for a number of years, called 4chan. This was on the tail end of like, ew, you met someone online? And it wasn't uncommon to see on like dating profiles or even, on even like Craigslist personals don't exist anymore, but even there you'd see like, hey, if we hit it off, I'm willing to say we met at a bookstore or something. So we meet on an area code hookup thread where you would type in the area code of your phone number, your sex, your age, and what you're looking for. Now, granted, I felt like I had a leg up because a lot of the New York City, like 347, 212, 718 area codes were basically like 25 male, down to fuck, and like a Skype screen name or like an email address. So I figured it was time to shine. So there's a webcomic called Electric Retard, and there's a reoccurring character in the comic strips called Mr. Brown. So I took a picture of Mr. Brown while he's walking in his gray suit under the smiling sun. And I just wrote like a paragraph of suggestions like, hey, let's go people watch at Union Square, or go to Pomfrey's, or faux idyllic cultural activities like going to a museum or shit like that. And I left my email address. So I'm sure this sounds weird, but like a part of me was like, no one will reply. And then I do get a reply like 3 days later, and it's like, fuck. And I always got that feeling, either on like getting a reply on Craigslist personals or on dating apps, and you matched with like Josephine, and it's like, shit, now I gotta try. So to her credit, she escalated things. No, not that way, but more like, hey, I'll give out my first name first. And then I responded in kind, and she gave me her number, and I texted her in kind to confirm that it wasn't some sort of like NSA agent in a white utility van with no license plates idling outside my building. So we settle on a Saturday to meet, and yeah, so this was in like July of 2014. So now fast forward to Halloween. So she's a gigantic weeb. So she went as Sailor Uranus, and she looked the part too, complete with like short hair. She naturally had short blonde hair. So I don't know how familiar you are with the Sailor Scouts, which, by the way, Jupiter is worst planet, but is also best scout. Fight me. So I figured, all right, like, worst case scenario, like my work clothing, because back in the day of offices, shirt and tie and trench coat. And, just to put a pin on this for a second, that's one of the few, if only, things I miss. The two things I miss about working in offices, courtesy of Chinese lung herpes turning a lot of people's jobs into email taskmasters, is being able to read on the train to and from work, because I after 2 hours I can't read at home. Like on a park bench or on the train, shit, I'll keep going till I gotta take a piss. So having to wear the monkey suit, you can get away with a lot of things in public by wearing a shirt and tie or a suit. And I do miss my government goon, black trench coat, black slacks, black shoes, black tie, black belt, white shirt motif. So it's Halloween, and I fucking slack and sleep on this until the last second and figure, I'll just get a mask and put it over my trench coat and shirt and tie, and So I go to Halloween City. It's a costume store that's open all year round, not far from Union Square. So you know when you go to like a supermarket and let's say you want like a tomato, there's like a pyramid of tomatoes, and there's like one tomato that sort of like presents itself to you, for lack of a better term. One your eye immediately catches like out the gate, or you're looking and then one looks, I suppose, much better than the rest for whatever reason. Well, a Blue Demon mask, top between center and left on the rack of masks, as clear as day, like fucking West Side Story, where it goes all soft focus and you hear the "It's in Love" music. Yeah. I didn't know a fucking thing about luchadors. I just thought that was the dopest shit in the history of ever. So I got the mask. And it was like, no thank you, I'll wear it home. And fuck the receipt, forget the bag. Hey, you got a garbage? And then I rip it off and I put it on right then and there and I walk out. And I'm on my way to meet my ex. It was funny how, like, in a way, I couldn't quite articulate it, but I noticed that there was no middle ground in terms of response. I guess the only middle ground is just avoiding eye contact and pretending you didn't see that. But it sort of brought out like people's emotional and mental defaults, kind of like flyers or when cameraman's in public. Or, if I'm walking around a 420 rally with a sandwich board that says legalize crack, ask me why. Which surprisingly enough had a lot of like positive response and feedback. Hey, there's video proof, trust me. Go to 718 TV on the YouTube channel. Those were good times. So it was a really lovely Halloween. I was surprised at the number of people who wanted to like stop and take pictures, apart from like, oh yeah, está el Blue Demon. And one wise ass going like, oh yeah, ¿dónde está el santo? Because he fucking knew. It was really endearing and charming. And the occasional like, like rolled eyes of like a girlfriend or a husband, fucking like Mexican dudes in metal shirt going like, oh yeah, Blue Demon, from like across the street, and I feel like I'm running for fucking public office, and I have to like, ten cuidado caballero, buenas noches. It's delightful. If you've never worn a mask in public, hey, don't knock it till you've tried it, all right? And it was great because I was able to get pictures with people in like incredibly dope costumes, and my in most of the time was them going like, hey, or responding to it. And sometimes you just have to read like the face and the body language, but that alone, and then I'd be like, that's a dope costume, and then thanks. And sometimes we'd talk shop and like, hey, this is fucking homemade. And minute and a half of that, and then you're like, hey, can I get a picture? And it was nuts. Dude in full chainmail with like a sword in its like hilt sheathed, fucking idea, and like walking around with a shield and like complete with like the coif, so like you could only see his face. And even he was like, dude, can we get a picture? That was anyways. So every Halloween since then, I'd wear the mask in my work clothing, because prior to that, like I'd go at homies and like we'd get wrecked, and we'd put on the zombie makeup beforehand, but we'd get wrecked. And like one year it would be like the 1968 original Night of the Living Dead zombies, so it's like white with the black circles around the eyes, and you got to get the fucking arms too, and you got to commit. You can't. Some people dress up as a zombie, but they look like just a fucking victim. That sucks, Or like one year we went as like the Day of the Dead zombies, so it's all green and fucked up. And it's nice because there's always a chance that you'll encounter like other zombies who don't suck, or like a group of zombies, and it's like Vietnam vets meeting one another like, hey, K-San, 69 to 71, and it's like, hey, Phnom Penh, 70 to 72, and and suddenly they're showing each other like pictures of their wife and kids. And then there's like one smart ass who's like, let me show you a picture of my Pride and Joy. And he pulls out his wallet, and it's like a picture of like Pride and Joy cleaning products. So yeah, it was great. Like a weird sense of like unspoken camaraderie. Like, hey, if it turns out that's really Jason Voorhees and he's like getting people right then and there, like we're on the same team. Yeah. So you get the same feeling like if you're walking down the street in like a Soulfly shirt, and then there's someone else across the street wearing a Soulfly shirt, and it's like, we're bros for life, but on a more pleasant level, I suppose.
Hey, you. No, not you. The other you. Anatomy of the Heads is the best band you're not listening to right now. What you need to do is go to aoftheh.com. You're welcome.
Hey, ladies and jerks. Welcome back to Trash Radio. I'm Stained Haynes. You know, one thing that makes this all really delightful to do and undertake is that you end up crossing paths with people on the interbuts who are just top shelf human beings and a cut above the rest. A great example of this is Pericles, otherwise known as Perry, who once upon a time was Fat Perry, and wouldn't you know it, there's a strong, small but very dedicated community to posting Fat Perry memes, and I'm no stranger to that either. It lends itself quite easily to it. You know, it should be noted that while there isn't a direct causation, perhaps there is a bit of correlation in where something that is easily memeable inherently means it's good. Now, that's not fail-safe, but how come Zoomers know more about Seinfeld than I do? They probably found it because of a fucking meme, too. The Sopranos is rather enduring and overlasting, really. I mean, no one ever talks about The Shield. Everyone talks about The Wire. I wonder how many people watch Breaking Bad. Anyways, you could even take something like The Simpsons or King of the Hill or SpongeBob. You could have not watched an episode of either of those shows, but, you know, through memes, now you have an understanding of it, or at least a very important, integral cornerstone of it, all right? So anyways, it's easy to lose sight of the fact that other than bots and people very far on both the left and right in culture war, behind every account is a person, and behind Election Legal is Perry. All right, now I don't want to fuck this up. Let's see what is Perry. I'm sorry if I'm blowing your spot. Hold on. I got to be proper here. Here we go. At Election Legal, you could find him on Twitter. Pericles Perry Abassi. All right. So I hit him up one time and I'm like, hey, can I post flyers of Fat Perry around my city? And he was like, yes. And he wasn't obligated to let me take that and run with it, but it's delightful. It's great. And you know what? You might know him as Fat Perry. Most of the world knows him as Perry. There are people who just are big mad at Perry being Perry, which is proof that Perry should just continue being Perry, because how the fuck does that even happen? So, without further ado, I'm going to tell you about Pericles, the man in ancient Greece that Perry was named after. Now you might want to go freshen up your drink, stretch your shit out, go have a smoke, take a walk. We're going to be here for a while, all right? So go on and take care of you, and I'll be right back. Pericles, Athenian statesman, born about 495 BC, the son of Xanthippus and Agariste. His father took a prominent part in Athenian politics, and in 479 BC, held high command in the Greek squadron which annihilated the remnants of Xerxes' fleet at Mycale. Through his mother, the niece, Cleisthenes, and is connected to the former tyrants of Sicyon and the family of Alcomaniade. His early training was committed to the ablest and most advanced teachers of the day. Damon instructed him in music. Zeno, the Eleatic, revealed to him the powers of dialectic. And the philosopher, Anaxagoras, who lived in close friendship with Pericles, had great influence on his cast of thought and was commonly held responsible for that calm and undaunted attitude of mind which he preserved in the midst of severest trials. The first important recorded act of Pericles falls in 463, when he helped to prosecute Cimon on a charge of bribery after the latter's Thasian campaign. But as the accusation could hardly have been meant seriously, Pericles was perhaps put forward only as a lay figure. Undue prominence has commonly been assigned to him in the attack upon Areopagus in 462 or 461. The Aristotelian Constitution of Athens shows consecutively that Pericles was not the leader of this campaign, for it expressly attributes the bulk of the reforms to Ephialtes, and mentions Ephialtes and Archestratus as the authors of the laws which the reactionaries of the 404 sought to repeal. Moreover, it was Ephialtes, not Pericles, on whom the conservatives took revenge as the author of their, an architect of their butthurt. To Ephialtes, likewise, we must ascribe the renunciation of the Spartan alliance in the new league with Argos and Thessaly at 461. Eventually, Ephialtes bites the dust and Pericles takes leading position in the state. So the beginning of his ascendancy is marked by an unprecedented outward expansion of Athenian power. In continuance with Simon's policy, 200 ships were sent to support the Egyptian insurgents against Persia in 459, while detachments operated against Cyprus and Phoenicia. At the same time, Athens embarked on several wars in Greece proper. An alliance with the Megarians, who were being hard-pressed by their neighbors of Corinth, led to enmity with this latter power. Before long, Epidaurus and Aegina were drawn into the struggle. On sea, the Athenians, after 2 minor engagements, gained a decisive victory, which enabled them to blockade Aegina. On land, their general, Myronides, beat off 2 Corinthian attacks in Megara, which had been further secured by long walls drawn between the capital and its port, Nisaea, nearly a mile distant. Beat off. In 457, the Athenians and their allies ventured to intercept the Spartan force which was returning home from central Greece. At Tanagra and Boeotia, a pitched battle was fought, in which both Pericles and the partisans of Cimon distinguished themselves. The Spartans were successful but did not pursue their advantage, and soon afterwards the Athenians, seizing their opportunity, sallied forth again, and, after a victory under Myronides at Oenphita, obtained the submission of all of Boeotia save Thebes and the Phocis and the Locris. In 455, Ptolemies ravaged Laconia and secured Naupactus on the Corinthian Gulf. In 454, Pericles himself defeated the Ciconians and made a descent upon Oenade at the mouth of the Gulf. And in 453, he was declared the world heavyweight champion of that corner of the earth. And these years marked the zenith of Athenian greatness. Yet, the drain on the country's strength was severe, and when news arrived in 453 that the whole of Egyptian armament, together with the reserve fleet, had been destroyed by the Persians, a reaction set in, and Cimon, who was recalled on Pericles' motion, was empowered to make peace with Sparta on the basis of the status quo. For a while, the old anti-Persian policy again found favor in Athens, and Cimon led a great expedition against Cyprus, but upon Simon's death, hostilities were suspended, and a lasting arrangement with Persia was brought about. It was probably in order to mark the definite conclusion of the Persian War, and to obtain recognition for Athens' work in punishing the Med that Pericles was now proposed as a Pan-Hellenic Congress at Athens to consult about the rebuilding of the ruined temples and the policing of the seas. But owing to the refusal of Sparta, the project fell through. And I don't know if it's Boeotia or Boeotia in the same way. I don't know if it's Aegina or Aegina or what. But just fucking bear with me here, okay? This is not English. So, Pericles may have now hoped to resume his aggressive policy in Greece proper. The events of the following years completely disillusioned him. In 447, an Athenian army, which had marched into Boeotia to quell an insurrection, had to surrender in a body at Coronea. The price of their ransom was the evacuation of Boeotia. Upon news of this disaster, Phocis, Locris, and Euboea revolted, and the Megarians massacred their Athenian garrison, while a Spartan army penetrated into Attica as far as Eleusis In this crisis, Pericles induced the Spartan leaders to retreat, apparently by means of a bribe, and hastened to reconquer Euboea, and the other land possessions could not be recovered, and in a 30 years truce, which was arranged in 445, Athens definitely renounced her predominance in Greece proper. Pericles' foreign policy henceforward underwent a profound change. To consolidate the naval supremacy, or to extend it by a cautious advance, remained his only ambition. While scouting the projects of the extreme radicals for interfering in distant countries, he occasionally made a display of Athens' power abroad, as in his expedition to the Black Sea and the colonization of Thurii, which marks the resumption of a Western policy. The peaceful development of Athenian power was interrupted by a revolt of Samos in 440. Pericles himself led out a fleet against the seceders and, after winning a first engagement, unwisely divided his armament and allowed one squadron to be routed. In a subsequent battle, he retrieved this disaster and, after a long blockade, reduced the town itself. A demand for help, which Samos had sent out to Sparta, was rejected at the instance of the Corinthians. Turning to Pericles' policy towards the members of the Delian League, we find that he frankly endeavored to turn the allies into subjects. A special feature of his rule was sending out armies that not only served the double purpose of securing strategic points to Athens, but also converting the needy proletariat of capital into owners of real property. Land was acquired either by confiscation from disaffected states or in exchange for a lowering of tribute if they belonged to someone else. And, like in Goodfellas, it was protection for guys that couldn't go to the cops. So if, the old people you were paying oops insurance to come knocking, you would just point to Pericles. So, in a way, he sort of made like ancient Malacca landowning gentry people connected and part of a crew because they could report, instead of Uncle Paulie, it's Perry. So, ancient Perry had the following people kicking up to him at the end of every week. Thrace, Lemnos, Imbros, Andros, Naxos, Eretria, Brea, Oresis, Amisus and Astacus in the Black Sea, and of course, Aegina. In his home policy, Pericles looked inward and elevated the standard of living not just for him and the people around him, but one can argue for Athens itself. You see, he wanted to carry out Ephialtes' project of making the Athenian people truly self-governing, depending who you ask. And if you ask me, I'd go, yeah. He did things like introduce payment from the public treasury for state service. If anyone had jury duty, that little garbage salary you got, no, you actually got pay for jury duty because it was a big deal to Pericles. He also he created what he called a theoricon, which allowed the poor citizens of Athens to attend the dramatic representations of the Dionysia. And to him, we can attribute the pay that soldiers got, during the Peloponnesian War, on top of the old established provision money. From local politicians all the way to minor magistrates. And, in 411, the first time they got paid for what they were doing was because of Pericles. In connection with the system of salaries, it should be mentioned a somewhat reactionary law carried by Pericles in 451, by which an Athenian parentage on both sides was made an express condition of retaining the franchise and with it the right of sitting on paid juries. The measure by which of this archonship was opened to the third and practically to the fourth class of citizens, the Zugiate and the Thetes, may also be due to Pericles. The date is now known to be 457. The last years of his life were troubled by a new period of storm and stress, which called for his highest powers of calculation and self-control. A conflict between Corcyra and Corinth, the second and third naval powers of Greece, led to the simultaneous appearance in Athens of an embassy from either combatant in 433. Pericles had, as it seems, resumed of late a plan of western expansion by forming alliances with Rhegium and Leotini, and the favorable position of Corcyra on the trade route to Sicily and Italy, as well as its powerful fleet, no doubt helped to induce him to secure an alliance with that island. And so, to commit an unfriendly act towards the leading representative to the Peloponnesian League, Pericles now seemed to have made up his mind that war with Sparta, the head of that league, had become inevitable. In the following spring, he fastened the quarrel upon Potidaea, a town in Chalcidice, which was attached by ancient bonds to Corinth. And in the campaign, which followed Athenian and Corinthian troops, well, shit met fan at light speed. A further casus belli was provided by a decree forbidding the importation of Megarian goods into the Athenian Empire, presumably in order to punish Megaria for her alliance with Corinth. And this is around in the spring of 432, when Athenian and Corinthians were throwing hands. Not on any official terms, but it was happening. And the combined complaints of the injured parties led Sparta to summon a Peloponnesian Congress, which decided on war against Athens, failing a concession to Megara and Corinth in the autumn of, that spring of throwing hands. In this crisis, Pericles persuaded the wavering assembly that compromise was useless, because Sparta was resolved to precipitate a war in any case. And, in early 431, hostilities officially began between Athens and Sparta and their respective allies. At the same time, Pericles was being sorely hampered by his adversaries at home. The Orthodox conservatives and some Democrats were jealous of his influence, while afraid to confront him, directly, combined to assail his nearest friends. The sculptor, Phidias, was prosecuted on two, trumped-up, terrible, made-up charges in 433, and before he could disprove the second one, he died under arrest. Anaxagoras was threatened with a law against atheists and felt compelled to leave Athens. A scandalous charge was made against his mistress, Aspasia, which he defeated by his personal intercession before the court. It was taken very much to heart by Pericles. His position at home scarcely improved during the war. His policy of abandoning the land defense was unpopular with the landowning section of the people, who from the walls of Athens could see their own property destroyed by the invaders. At the end of the first year of the war, in early 430, Pericles made a great appeal to the pride of his countrymen in his well-known funeral speech. But in the ensuing summer, after a terrible outbreak of plague had ravaged the crowded city, people became thoroughly demoralized. Pericles led a large squadron to secure the Peloponnesian coast, but was met with little success. On his return, the Athenians sued for peace, though without success, partially due by a speech from Pericles himself. However, in late 430, they deposed of him from his official title and positions. In addition to this, they prosecuted him on a charge of embezzlement and imposed a fine of 50 talents. A revulsion of feeling soon led to his reinstatement, apparently with extraordinary powers. But the plague, which had carried off 2 of his sons and a sister, had left its mark also on Pericles himself. In autumn of 429, he died and was buried near the Academia, where Pausanias, later in 150 AD, saw his tomb. A slightly idealized portrait of Pericles as Stratigo is preserved in the British Museum bust number 549, which is a good copy of the well-known bronze original by Cresialis. If we now endeavor to give a general estimate of Pericles' character and achievements, it will be well to consider the many departments of his activity one by one. In his foreign policy, Pericles differs from those statesmen of previous generations who sought above all the welfare of Greece as a whole. His standpoint was at all times purely Athenian, nor did he combine great statesman-like qualities with exceptional ability in the field. We may clearly distinguish two periods in his administration of foreign affairs. At first, joining to Simon's anti-Persian ambitions and Themistocles' schemes of Western expansion, a new policy of aggression on the mainland, he endeavored to push forward Athenian power in every direction, and engaged himself alike in Greece proper, and the Levant, and in Sicily. After Simon's death, he renounced the war against Persia, and the collapse of 447 to 445 had the effect of completing his change of attitude. Henceforth, he repressed all projects of reckless enterprise and confined himself to the gradual expansion and consolidation of the empire. It's not quite easy to see why he abandoned this successful policy in order to hasten on a war with Sparta, and neither the Corcyraean alliance nor the Megarian decree seems justified by the facts as known to us, though commercial motives may have played a part, which we cannot now gauge. In his adoption of a purely defensive policy at the beginning of the Peloponnesian War, he miscalculated the temper of the Athenians, whose morale would have been better sustained by a greater show of activity. But in the main, his policy in 439 to 429 was sound, and the disasters of the war cannot fairly be laid to his charge. The foundation of, the ancient Malacca landowning gentry ordeal he had was an admirable device, which in many ways anticipated the colonial system of the Romans. In his attitude towards the members of the Delian League, Pericles likewise maintained a purely Athenian point of view, but he could hardly be said seriously to have oppressed the subject cities. And technically, all the League money was spent on League business, for Athena, to whom the chief monuments in Athens were reared, was the patron goddess of the League. Under Pericles, Athens also attained her greatest measure of commercial prosperity, and the activity of her traders all over the Levant, however the fuck you say that, the Black Sea and the West, is attested not only by literary authority, but also by numerous Attic coins, vases, or vases, however you say that, etc. Pericles' home policy has been much debated since ancient times. His chief enactments relate to the payment of citizens for state service. These measures have been interpreted as an appeal to the baser instincts of the mob, but this assumption is entirely out of keeping with all we know of Pericles' general attitude towards the people, over whom Thucydides, come on, just bear with me, all right? Thucydides, all right, we'll go with that, says he practically ruled as a king. We must then admit that Pericles sincerely contemplated for the good of his fellow countrymen, and we may believe that he endeavored to realize that ideal Athens which Thucydides sketches in the funeral speech, an Athens where free and intelligent obedience is rendered to an equitable code of laws, where merit finds its way to the front, where military efficiency is found, along with a free development in other directions and strangles neither commerce nor art. In accordance with this scheme, Pericles sought to educate the whole community to political wisdom by giving to all an active share in the government, and to train their aesthetic tastes by making accessible the best drama and music. It was most unfortunate that the Peloponnesian War ruined this great project by diverting the large supplies of money which were essential to it and confronting the remodeled Athenian democracy, before it could dispense with its tutelage with a series of intricate questions of foreign policy, which, in view of its inexperience, it could hardly have been expected to grapple with successfully. Pericles also incurred unpopularity because of his rationalism in religious matters. Yet Athens, in his time, was becoming ripe for the new culture and would have done better to receive it from men of his circle, Anaxagoras, Zeno, Protagoras, and Meton, than from the more irresponsible sophists. The influence of Aspasia on Athenian thought, though denounced unsparingly by most critics, may indeed have been beneficial, inasmuch as it tended towards the emancipation of the Attic woman over the over-strict tutelage in which she was kept. As a patron of art, Pericles was still a greater force. His policy in encouraging the drama has already been mentioned, and among his friends he can count three of the greatest Greek writers, the poet Sophocles and the historians Herodotus and Thucydides. Pericles likewise is responsible for the epoch-making splendor of Attic art in his time, for had he not so fully appreciated and given such free scope to the genius of Phidias, Athens would hardly have witnessed the raising of the Parthenon and other glorious structures, and Attic art could not have boasted a legion of first-rate sculptors, among whom Alcamenus, Agoracritus, and Paeonius are only the chief names. Of Pericles' personal characteristics, we have a peculiarly full and interesting record. He was commonly compared to Olympian Zeus, partly because of his serene and dignified bearing, partly by reason of the majestic role, of the thundering eloquence, with its bold and poetic imagery, with which he held friend and foe spellbound. The same dignity appeared in the grave beauty of his features, though the abnormal height of his cranium afforded an opportunity for ridicule, of which the comedians made full use. In spite of an unusually large crop of scandals about him, we cannot but believe that he bore an honorable character, and his integrity is vouched for by Thucydides in such strong terms as to exclude all further doubt on the question. Pericles, 495 BC to 429 BC.
Listen up, ladies and jerks. If you're sick of pre-manufactured, mass-produced reading materials, then check out Cars and Women magazine, North America's premier publication for unpublished and rejected literature from the sticky underbelly of the internet hate machine.
Every couple of years, I go to LA to see my bookie. He golfs, and cause the municipal golf courses aren't bugged, it's his office. I don't know anyone else who takes bets like, we're gonna liberate the shit out of Ethiopia, or Malthusian catastrophe in Africa by 2028, let alone take it in crypto, or currencies other than the dollar. I've come to enjoy golf. I spend a lot of time on the course at a very early hour when I'm out there, and believe it or not, I can't get a lot of my buddies or fellow operators up for a 5:45 a.m. tee time. So I end up playing a shitload of golf alone. Golf is a good sport for that, because you don't need anybody else. However, if you do show up alone, sometimes the course teams you up with people you don't know, and that could end up being a real treat. I've golfed a number of times with older Asian couples who never said a word to each other or me for 18 holes. I played a round one Saturday with three drunken ham-bones in their mid-20s who showed up bright and early straight from a party. Unexpectedly worthy adversaries. They waited until the fifth tee box before they started doing bumps. And then shit got serious. But after a few more holes, two told me to just go on ahead by myself because they thought I was playing too fast, while the third just made noises while gacking and golfing. Almost beat me too. I've played tons of times with guys in their 50s or 60s, smoking bowls of primo stuff at 6 a.m., only to tell me they have to cut out early to head to work. I once played with a single older Asian woman, and after about 4 holes I asked her why she was there all by herself. She told me, "I'm not by myself. My husband is playing in the group right ahead of us." The best part is that her husband was playing with only 2 other guys and opted to still make his wife play with the weird-looking round eye and a luchador mask behind him. I got teamed up once at a 9-hole par 3 with a huge NFL linebacker from the Bengals who got really mad at me when I whipped his ass on every hole. Then we made a truce once 2 groups of stuntmen decided to settle a beef on the 14th hole in case we got caught in the ensuing melee. I'm on his Christmas card list and always wish him well on the back of a flyer folded into an envelope. I should send him some zines this year. After a few days, I forget why I'm there. Southern California is really nice in small doses, like wasabi or grain alcohol. It's funny how here I could go, "Look at those bunch of Mexicans over there," and a mob of mostly Chomsky hunks would show up. But someone says that in LA every hour, on the hour. It's not until the front desk gets a call, then finds me whether I'm in my room, ghosting women who lie about their age on Tinder, at Amoeba Records, or collecting bubonic plague samples from Skid Row. I forget I'm there to see my bookie. It's fine. I wouldn't want to stay any longer. One time, I was at Amoeba and met a comically beautiful woman who adored my mask and told me I had the most beautiful eyes in the world. The bookie called the place looking for me. The employees pulled me aside. They all now think I'm in the mob. She won't return my calls. She works at the last bookstore, and a sketch of me is by the door and at the counter to let the employees know that the authorities should be contacted if I'm ever on what they call company ground. If I didn't have anything going on in my life, I'd burn the place down and propose to her. My bookie, who has a photographic memory but no film, goes, "Let's go for a ride." We spend a day or two. He does this every time. You'll shake people down, bust some heads, collect from a brothel he co-owns, and others he's got in a Rolodex he keeps in the glove compartment, expecting me to be surprised. I'm not. Then he remembers I'm that luchador from back east. He's white trash from Sunnyside, grew up throwing hands with the children of Irish immigrants. He talks a lot like I do. You'd think the only other guy in LA who sounds like he does in a mask would jog his memory, right? So once it clicks, We get straight to business, but only after we hang out for an afternoon. He likes to do business over meals, just like the Malakas back home. Envelope under the table, or stuffed in a newspaper, slid across the counter. He always takes us to a Mexican joint, and I translate our order. He gets nervous whenever I write anything down, or if I'm on my phone for longer than 3 seconds. I don't blame him. It comes at the price of never having to look over both shoulders every time he's going to or from somewhere. But I swear he says the most ridiculous shit in the world. Turns out Mr. Mojo Rising now weighs 380 pounds and lives in a low-income apartment complex in Riverside, living on half-cold pizza and daily deliveries from a local liquor store. Is hiding out for over 40 years better than going to prison in Florida? I suppose it is. Before you get a lethal injection, they swab your arm with alcohol. Some fucking world, right? Castro's son up north, Miley Cyrus, Taylor Swift, and Grandpa Simpson in the White House all have body doubles. Women have out-group bias instead of in-group bias. That's why they fail in the corporate world and never have complex hobbies. Imagine being a woman cop. I loved how Nobody TM strung together contrasting, the fuck are they called? You called them archetypes? Yeah, you're fucking, what'd you say? Like, related in some anagological, you're fucking talking about having a palette, but instead of MS Paint, red and blue and green, it's them furries, ABDL, trans people. You said they were as archetypes. Bro, what the fuck is an archetype? You can uproot a consciousness, but not one's essence. Yo, we need to make hockey's conferences Canada and America instead of East and West. Then every year, we could have a border war cup.
Yeah, baby. Unclean actions at a decent discount. Woo!
That's all I can remember. It's hard when you can't write anything down. You can only retain so much until he goes to do a bump in the bathroom when we're somewhere. Or he goes, wait here, I got some magazines in the glove compartment. And he sees a hooker for an hour and a half. So I make my bets, hand him my envelope, and he always takes us out for dessert. I don't care much for fancy places. He's got no issue going to Santo Pasta Bar, handing the lady in the front 200s and just going, look, just give us the banana pudding tiramisu and we'll leave. Look, I'm from Queens. I'll settle on Baskin Robbins. Hell, I'll settle on Mr. Softy. We could just get a fucking toasted almond bar or a coconut frozen fruit. But he's trash and knows we don't have the same kind of shit back home, and he'll flex. Macaroons from Bategaloo, we were okay, I guess. Then we drive around to commemorate our doing of business like respectable gentlemen. And we burn joints of what I could only deduce is stuff grown on the Dagobah system. What comes from that state, I get it should be illegal. Then he gets all wistful and asks a million questions about how the neighborhood has changed. I always suspected it's to see what, holds up in his memory to what it's actually like. I don't know what he did or what happened, but stepping foot in Florida or any of the 5 boroughs is out of the question. I always wondered about that and why, but I shouldn't. Then we do it all over again next time I'm in town. So I'm no gambler, but he's the only guy who I know, take such bets. And he always rounds up for you and even eats the gas fees. Good guy, apart from whatever haunts him. I wonder what the rest of California is like. Big place. I should write a book. Socrates was a famous IRL troll of pre-internet's Greece, credited with inventing the first recorded trolling technique, and otherwise laying the foundation of Western philosophy. It should be noted that if it wasn't for Plato, we'd have no record of Socrates. It's because of his live journal that we have any indication that this guy ever existed. And fun fact, yeah, I know, it's Socrates and Plato, alright, just leave me alone. But reminder that Plato was his wrestling name. It's ancient Greek for wide. I mean, like if Plato was alive today, he'd probably be called Doorbra because he has to turn at an angle to enter and exit through doorways. And Socrates wasn't a slouch either. He fought for Athens in 3 wars. Accounts of his successful trolls are in the form of TLDR copy pasta on Plato's live journal. There they have been causing all manner of butthurt and ass disaster for thousands of years in Philosophy 101 classes around the world. In his own words, I am that gadfly which God has attached to the state, and all day long, and in all places, am always fastening upon you, arousing and persuading and reproaching you. According to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, Socrates never wore shoes. could bench twice his weight, and was impervious to the effects of alcohol and cold. He did not care for fashion, and his gait was that of one who truly did not give a shit. One time, for fun, he lured pretentious moral fags called sophists, the Wikipedia admins of the time, into pointless drama by giving their egos handjobs with obviously ironic compliments. Then, he applied the Socratic method, which reveals the weak knees of a lot of people's beliefs and opinions, which are based on what trickles down to presumptions, presuppositions, deliberate ignorance, doctrine, groupthink, and the shit you were raised with but never questioned. This method earned Socrates many flawless victories but made him many enemies, like Aristophanes, a fur fag with a thing for frogs, who wrote a play where a lizard shits on Socrates' head. With the invention of the internet, the Socratic method was refined on image boards, the catch-all antagonist for people scared to death of what is true until around Obama's second term in office. After many years of collective butthurt, Athens finally had enough of his snarky bullshit. In 399 BC, Socrates was put on trial for corrupting the youth and impiety. He didn't believe in the pantheon of gods. He said he was guided by an inner monologue. That got them so mad. He claimed he had an inner voice, a dialogue if you will, instructing him in all manners throughout his life, and that this voice was not one of the accepted gods, but his own personal god, the daemonium. The concept of an inner dialogue was considered heresy in ancient Greece. Here we see the earliest documented instance of a cognitive, independent individual seen as a threat to the state and its population. They were also upset because he talked mad shit. Imagine your civilization invents democracy, and some guy with a crowd shows up going, "Your system of government does not require proof of special knowledge in its leaders and forces the masses to surrender their destiny to those without experience. There is little wisdom in the masses, and the combination of freedom and poor education renders them incapable of self-mastery. Those incapable of self-governance will prostrate themselves before messianic leaders, because most people rest content with an understanding of things thousands of volumes wide, but only one volume deep. And when given power, their shallowness inevitably leads to injustice. If you want to keep what you got going, you'll probably sentence him to death and put on a show trial so no one thinks you're just being mean." They did the ancient version of deplatforming and silencing by simply refusing to answer his questions. That's right, they muted him. A slim majority managed to convict him, and the punishment was death by hemlock. According to legend, he didn't flinch and invited his homies so he can be sent off on somewhat decent terms. I mean, would you want to die alone if given the option not to? By some accounts, he described the poison working its way up his body, numbing everything until death. Socrates, 469 BC to 399 BC. In his own words, "The children now live in luxury. They have bad manners, contempt for authority. They show disrespect for elders and love chatter in the place of exercise. Children are now tyrants, not the servants of their households. They no longer rise when elders enter the room. They contradict their parents, chatter before company, gobble up dainties at the table, cross their legs, and tyrannize their teacher." Oh, and in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, reminder that Socrates was fearless, delighted even, when traveling through time while everyone else in the phone booth was terrified.
What's up, ladies and jerks? You like things that don't suck. So for more of the finest garbage this side of Meat Space, come on down to the Trash Radio Patreon. I can't promise that my buttery, trashy voice will stop rearranging things in your living room when you're not home.